running argument. We have a running argument in our family about who is really older. It's true that I came into this world chronologically before Sarah, but it's not been settled that in fact she is not the oldest of my mother's children. And no matter what's going on in my life, if Sarah asks, I try to say yes, because she is a person who never says no. This morning, our topic is hide and seek, exploring the rationale, the meaning, so the Kabbalistic meaning of kisui rosh, which is the Hebrew term for the mitzvah of a married woman covering her hair. But really what I want to talk about this morning is what we don't know, what we can never know. It's been said that there are three categories of knowledge. What we know, which is no matter who we are, always going to be very limited. It's always going to be the smallest of the three categories. Then there's what we know we don't know. For instance, I know I don't speak many languages. In fact, I speak no languages aside from English, Yiddish, and maybe a smattering of Hebrew. So I know that I don't know all the other languages. And likewise, I was aware and am aware of just how little I know of so many disciplines, including, for instance, I knew that I was completely unfamiliar with marine biology. But I really didn't know how much I didn't know about marine biology. In fact, I had no idea before a trip to Key Largo a few years ago. And we decided to take a trip on one of those boats that have a glass bottom so you could see what's going on beneath the waters. And I learned some fascinating things, like that the male seahorse gets the eggs from the female and carries them around for 45 days. Yes, you heard me correctly. Gestation happens in the male. That's the way to do it. Seahorses also have a head like a horse, a tail like a monkey, and swim in vertical rather than in horizontal position. Now, we were looking at some coral reef. It's the third largest coral reef in the world. But what I didn't know was that coral reef is part animal, part plant, and part mineral. The polyps are tentacled animals connected atop the reef by a layer of living tissue. Outside tissue are the algae. And finally, the polyps secrete limestone, which builds the skeletons that make up the reef. In case you're curious, the three largest reefs are in Australia, Belize, and in Florida. How about this? I learned that there are fish that turn blue when they are feeling aggressive. Now that would be useful if that happened to people. What about this? Blue band goby fish change gender from male to female and female to male. Clownfish change genders as well. And you know what? For some of these fish, it takes only a few hours to change genders, and for some up to 2 weeks. But here's my favorite piece of information that I acquired. There are 7 quintillion, 500 quadrillion grains of sand in the world. This is according to the math geniuses at the University of Hawaii. That's more sand granules in earth, seas, lakes, and deserts than we could ever imagine. Where does it all come from? Well, in Hawaii, for instance, where beaches are constantly ranked the best in the world, a significant portion of that pristine, white, beautiful sand is actually poop. Yes, poop, you heard me correctly. Parrotfish, or uhu in Hawaiian, are key players in regulating the algae and reef life. Their parrot-like beaks and fused together teeth are used for scraping and biting dead coral, while additional teeth in their throats, they have 2 sets of teeth. The teeth in their throats help to break it all down into sand. If you've ever gone snorkeling, you could actually hear them chomping or see the bite marks that they leave on rocks. Now, because parrotfish don't have stomachs, their meals pass straight through the long intestines, exploding in a cloud of sand out the back door. Larger parrotfish are like sand factories. They produce as much as 840 pounds of sand per year. I can't even imagine what I don't know about nature and the astounding creations of Hashem. So that was just a smidgen of info from what I acquired in an area that I knew nothing about. A little did I know. So what we know we don't know is much larger than the category of what we know. But by far the largest category is what we don't know. I have no way of knowing what I don't know beyond all the things I know I don't know. But that last category is the hugest one. Look, let's be real. Nothing has taught us so clearly and perhaps shockingly how much we don't know as COVID has. The catchword that was used over and over and over again was unprecedented, which was totally not the case. There have been worse plagues and more horrific tragedies. People lived through much greater hardships, and they didn't have DoorDash and Netflix. What was unprecedented, however, is our level of arrogance, our fervent belief that we are in control. That's what threw us for a loop. We learned the hard way how untrue that is. And now, 2 years later, we still don't know. And we still can't admit that there's something we know we don't know. At least our governments can't. There's a lot about this virus that is still eluding scientists. So what do? They span it this way and that way. They loosen restrictions, they tighten restrictions. Can't really figure out why there's a surge in certain places where there are tighter restrictions, draconian measures even. So making sense of the way this virus actually works is still an elusive goal, even as, thank God, we have gotten so much better at controlling and treating it. So maybe it's time for us to let go and let God, or at least concede that there are things beyond our ken. And I only preface with this morning so we can be reminded that as much as we study on any given aspect, and certainly in any aspect of Torah, we know nothing. And we don't even know the extent of what we don't know. If we still know so little about any science, any discipline, or category of knowledge, how much more so this is true regarding Torah, which is infinite, which is the knowledge of God. It is one with God. It is God. So how can we really suppose to know God? And yet at the same time, we are bidden to study and study more, to keep studying. It has been said that study is like the windshield wipers. What do? They wipe away the grime that block us from seeing straight through the window of our soul. So it's not that it creates something new. It creates a possibility for us to see through the window. And it's not the knowledge that moves us to action. It's the soul, but the knowledge provides a bridge from which we can jump off. So let's begin and talk a little bit about why should or does a married Jewish woman cover her hair? Why indeed does the Torah mandate hair covering for married women? On the most simple and most profound levels, kisui rosh, which is Hebrew for head covering for married women, is simply a chok. That is the term for a statute, an observance, a mitzvah that defies intellectual inquiry and rational explanation. It is the will of God. It remains trans-rational to us mortals. And by the way, it's precisely this component that makes the chukim, this category, the mitzvah, which are trans or supra-rational, the quintessential expression of a mitzvah, because we observe it for no other reason than because God so desires. There's no ulterior motive, and there's not necessarily satisfaction to be found in this mitzvah. There's only the pure, pristine, unadulterated desire to bond with the Almighty. It's not about our intelligent embrace of the idea. Other mitzvot that fall into the same category are kashrut. We don't have a reason for why God says that certain foods are good for our soul and certain foods will not serve them well. In fact, they're dangerous for our soul. Kashrut has nothing to do with trichinosis. Or take the mitzvah of shatnez. Shatnez is the biblical prohibition for a Jew to wear a garment made of a mixture of wool and linen. Why God is offended by that mixture defies our intelligence. This is all to say that we have to learn how to respect what we cannot know. Now, for some reason, and I'm kind of sad to admit this, it seems especially true that we lack the ability to accept our inability to completely fathom a mitzvah when it's a distinctly women's mitzvah. Like, for instance, take the mitzvah of mikvah. People make up all kinds of stories. You should go to the mikvah. It's like a spa. A mikvah is not like a spa. Some of them are plainer. Some of them are actually more beautiful than spas, but that's not the point. You go to a spa when you have dispensable income, disposable time. You go to the mikvah when it's the time to go, whether you feel like it or not. Oh, you have to go to the mikvah because it's so spiritual. Well, what if I don't find it spiritual? What if I come out of the mikvah cold and wet? But people fill your head with this nonsense. And then you go to the mikveh and you don't touch base with your great grandmothers. You don't hear celestial choirs. You don't feel completely rejuvenated and reborn. And then you feel like you missed the boat. Like this is the wrong thing for you. Like this doesn't work. But that's not true. Or it's good for your relationship. Your sex life will be off the charts. Now, it is true that this mitzvah introduces an otherwise unattainable dynamic in the relationship. But let's be real here. There's a lot of people that use the mikvah and their marriages aren't shambled. There's a lot of people who've never heard the word and their marriages are strong because marriage is a very, very complex construct. And when we mouth these platitudes and we make these promises, we're not doing anyone a favor, least of all God. Mikvah is a mitzvah. It allows us to become one, to touch the divine in ways that are impossible through any other means. And it's the same thing with covering our hair. So enough with the nonsense. So with hair covering, we get the same syndrome. So we get things like, we have to cover our hair because the hair is holy, completely fabricated. We have to cover our hair to keep it special for our husband. False. We have to cover our hair so everyone knows we're married. Dubious. We have to cover our hair so we remember that we are married. A wedding ring of sorts. Oh, really? Where does it say that? We have to cover our hair so we look less attractive. Now that's complete baloney crossed with malarkey. So why? So why in heaven's sake do we have to cover our hair? Why are we so afraid to say? Because God said so. Period, exclamation point. The closest we come to an understanding in primary texts for this mitzvah is noting that there is a definite connection between hair covering and loss of virginity. The hair of a betula, an unmarried virgin woman, irrespective of her age, is not considered erva. Erva is a halachic term for nakedness or any aspect of the body considered to be erotic. But with consummation of her marriage, a woman is initiated into sexual experience. And when she taps into the power and the prowess inherent in intimacy, a need for an additional aspect of tzniut, modesty, emerges. And this is the mitzvah of kisui rosh, of covering the hair. Hair is an extremely sensual part of a woman. Nothing is quite as alluring. Now, a woman and her husband, of course, undoubtedly share an exclusive bond, enjoying each other's bodies within the framework of halakha, of course. That's inherent to marriage. That's inherent to our intimacy. But that's not the reason for covering aspects of our body referred to in halakha as erva. Simply put, the exposure of erva, in this case, the hair of a married woman, goes against the notion of tzniut, modesty. The prophet Micha, in his essential distillation of the entire Torah, he said the entire Torah is about these words: do justice, love goodness, and walk modestly with your God. Tzniut. Now, tzniut is not an outfit, it's a worldview. It begins with a constant consciousness of Hashem's presence that fills all time and all space. This is why tzniut is necessary, even when we're alone, even in the dark. And tzniut is certainly about carrying ourselves with dignity, befitting the daughter of the King of all kings. But this idea, this nonsense that we cover our hair to keep it special for our husband, I ask you to think about the erotic zones of your body. And if you cover them when you walk out of the house to keep it special for your husband, or you cover it because that's what dignified people do. So a married woman covers her hair to walk with her creator, to be tzniut. And this now allows us to reply to some of the other questions that come out of this mistaken assumption. Like, if a sheitel, a wig, looks just as good as your hair or even better, especially with the newest wigs looking like they're literally growing out of your scalp, what is the point of the wig? But again, the Torah mandates that a married woman must cover her hair. A wig does exactly that. It's common for people to question the efficacy of something that looks good, but it's based on the mistaken and unfortunately prevalent assumption that hair covering is somehow meant to detract from a woman's beauty. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's just like that other silliness of covering it just to keep it for your husband. You know, if it was true that a woman's hair and her beauty were solely to be enjoyed by her husband, it might indeed be the case that a hair covering, and in fact, anything else a woman covers her body with, would have to diminish her attractiveness. But it's not the case. Jewish law mandates that a married woman's hair must be properly covered. As to exactly how she does that, that's up to her. You want to wear a flower pot, a potato sack, whatever she wants. There are different customs in different communities, but Jewish law doesn't legislate exactly how it has to be covered. Now, beyond questions about the beauty of a wig, there seems to be a concern with just how closely it resembles a woman's natural hair. And so I will tell you that centuries ago, that's hundreds of years ago, this very question was already addressed. You see, because in every generation, there's just like a more modern, more beautiful iteration of wig or hair covering. But this question already arises centuries ago. And the Shiltei Giborim wrote that the principle that the sight of a married woman's hair constitutes erva, something which must be covered, an erotic stimulus, applies only to hair connected to her scalp. And he further said that such wigs do not constitute leaving the hair uncovered. So in fact, according to his responsum, it doesn't make a difference whether the wig is made from her own hair or from another woman, as long as it's unconnected to her scalp. Another authority, Rabbi Ovadia Hadaya, wrote, man is tempted, and man here is humanity, is tempted only by things attached directly to the body of the woman herself, for those things have life. Once something is separated from her, it ceases to be forbidden. So now people talk about how, oh, but maybe other people won't know that she's wearing a wig. And that's a halachic concern called marit ayin, which means what it is perceived like through the eyes of somebody else. So let me give you an example. I'm a little bit shy of 58, so I'm definitely old enough to remember when going to bar mitzvahs or weddings or other events, where on the table there would be a card from the caterer that said that the creamer for the coffee and that the ice cream and whatever other items on the menu that they felt they had to explain were made from non-dairy ingredients. Why? Because back then it was such a novelty. Now cow's milk is only one of 18 different types of milk. People are actually surprised when you want dairy milk. But then people were not. People were shocked that there was a non-dairy item that looked like creamer or ice cream or whatever else. So there had to be a sign that said it's made of non-dairy ingredients. Otherwise, it would be marat ayin. It would appear to the eye like you're doing a sin. You're eating a steak dinner and then you're having ice cream, for instance. Okay. If you look back into the Talmud, it talks about how when a person drinks almond milk, there should be almonds floating on the top. So the person that looks at it knows what you're drinking. But why don't we have those signs today? Because everybody knows that these are options. Okay. So it's the same thing here. Everybody knows that there are gorgeous wigs on the market. Everybody knows that these wigs look very, very natural. It's not a problem to wear one of these. So in summation, we don't really know why it's important to God that a married woman cover her hair. But we do have abundant information about the impact of this action on a woman and her family. For instance, the Talmud relates that a woman named Kimchit merited to have 7 sons who were high priests. What the Talmud asks is, how did you possibly merit such greatness? The Gemara relates, the Talmud relates, that the sages asked her, what have you done to merit this? And she said, the rafters of my house have never seen the plaits, the braids of my hair. That means that her behavior had an effect on her children. 7 sons became high priests, and it had an effect on her grandchildren and great-grandchildren until the end of time. That's what happens. At a public address, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once asked, he was kind of echoing what women might say in their mind. He said, okay, what if I don't want to have a high priest? It's enough if my kids are priests. You know what? I don't even need them to be priests. I just want them to grow up to be mensch. But the Rebbe said, really? Wouldn't any mother do anything to give her kids every advantage, a leg up in any possible way? Which mother would consciously deny her child every possible advantage in life, especially if it hinges on her choice? So much is not in our control. And actually, it's fascinating that while in general priesthood, kehuna, passes via the patrilineal line, but kehuna gedola, the high priesthood, which is the most exclusive privilege of all, was actually affected by the mother, the woman, and specifically through her degree of care in this mitzvah of kisui rosh. Now, in addition to this extraction from the Talmud, the Zohar, the Bible of Jewish mysticism, famously states that if a woman is careful to scrupulously cover her hair at all times, enormous blessings from above and below, meaning spiritually and physically, will be heaped upon her, her husband, and her children. Now, the mystical implications of a married woman keeping her hair carefully covered go way beyond ordinary considerations of modesty. The Zohar's position connects to the much broader idea that hair is associated with dinim, with harsh judgment, and is thus uniquely vulnerable to klipa, to negative energies. So a married woman's scrupulousness in covering her hair acts not only as a protective device in warding off these unwelcome energies, but it acts as a conduit for the most important blessings in life. And in a few moments, I'll go into a little bit more of a detailed explanation of the Kabbalah behind hair covering. But before that, I want to note that this Kabbalistic emphasis brings us right back to the beginning, to a recognition that there is so much that we can never actually know. There is an entire plane of reality that is obscured and shrouded by the veneer, by the facade that is our physical world, which is why we call the world olam, etymologically rooted in the word he'elem, which means to obfuscate. Living our lives aligned with the Torah mitzvos allows us to uncover this strata, this truth, and to tap into its energies. Hair covering for the married woman might just be exhibit A, but let's be honest. How do you understand the mitzvah of taking a citron, a closed frond from a date palm tree, a myrtle, and a willow, bringing them all together and shaking it? Have you ever tried to think about this logically? Let me spare you. Don't try. Don't try. Now, of course, Kabbalah and Hasidut can explain the energies of these four species. But again, these explanations only point to how much we can never know. So maybe more than important than anything else is making peace with the fact that Jews are different. We are unusual. We are eternal and we are transcendent. We are commanded to live in this world, but we are most certainly not of this world. We have an aspect of the divine that we carry around within us all the time, our neshama. And if we pay attention, we can hear it reminding us of the privilege of being connected to that which we cannot understand, the spectacular wonder of tapping into that which we cannot know. So I think we just need to learn how to lean in to our mitzvahs, embrace the mitzvot in all of their transcendence and counterintuitiveness, and do so proudly. So now I'll talk a little bit about the Kabbalah of hair covering. As long as we all understand that we can never understand, then I'm happy to do that. So just give me a moment. And I'm gonna. Okay. So first, it's helpful to remind ourselves of how Kabbalah works, more generally speaking. So I would say a good metaphor for how Kabbalah works is a microscope. A microscope is an instrument that provides an enlarged image of a small object, thus revealing the many, many details that are too small to be seen by the unaided eye. So with every aspect of the universe, Kabbalistic teachings approach the topic of hair, for instance, seeking to understand its spiritual aspects, its spiritual properties, its ability to attract or conversely repel spiritual energies. And perhaps this is surprising, but hair actually occupies a rather prominent place in Kabbalistic teachings and practice. So first, a little bit of vocabulary. Klipa. Klipa is a term you'll find often in Zoharic writings, and it translates as husk or shell. It's a force that covers and conceals the divine energy, the divine oneness that is beneath all of creation. Okay. Now, these forces of Klipa are always seeking access to Kedusha, to holiness, especially via the Jewish body. This is what they must do in order to flourish. They have to siphon energy from the side of holiness. So for example, if you have a beautiful garden, you're not going to go out there and water your weeds, but the weeds will get some of the water that you are watering your roses with. That's how klipa works. It's always jostling and jockeying to get into a position where it can feed off of. It's like a leech. It's trying to get what it needs. Now, the inherent kedusha, the inherent holiness of a Jew repels these unholy seekers, these, let's call them what they are, parasites. Because the body of a Jew is so holy, it overwhelms them. It keeps them at bay. But the hair is different. The hair, different from all aspects of the human anatomy, is not connected to the brain. That's why hair doesn't have nerve endings or blood vessels. So the hair is not quite alive, but it's certainly not completely dead. That's why it continues to grow. But it does hold the most minute amount of living energy. In Kabbalistic terms, when we speak about the minimization of an energy, when we talk about a smaller, more contracted form, we are talking about the process of tzimtzum, contraction. Because here is aligned with this energy of tzimtzum, of contraction, of minute amount, it actually beckons to the klipot. It's perfect for them. It provides the perfect portal, the perfect entry point to the kedusha that they are desperately seeking to siphon from. On the other hand, tzimtzum, and in this case, its expression in here, which derives from Hashem's power to limit or withhold, gives rise to something we call dinim or gevurot, severity, and often negative energy. For this reason, tzimtzum has to be handled with tremendous care. On one hand, if you don't have tzimtzum, you can have nothing else. On the other hand, tzimtzum does have, it's a double-edged sword. It does have the negative and dangerous side to it. So now let's try to get closer to our area of study, kisui rosh for a woman. So in order to do this, it's helpful to kind of zoom out and review the Kabbalistic teachings concerning the hair of a man. The Kabbalistic writings emphasize that a man's hair should be kept short. In this way, guarding against the klipot, which are seeking a place from which to take root and to siphon energy. A man's long hair can attract and beckon to the klipot, and their presence can precipitate all kinds of spiritual dangers. This scenario, the Kabbalah warns, should be avoided. That's why you're probably not going to see any Hasidic men with long hair. Now, interestingly enough, there's no mention in these writings regarding the spiritual qualities of a female's hair. The only mention has to do with it being covered after she gets married. So what accounts for the difference between a male's hair and a female's hair? And what changes vis-a-vis this when she gets married? So to answer this question properly, we have to reference yet another Kabbalistic idea. And this might be one of the most basic of all Kabbalistic axioms. We are taught that the entire world, the entire universe, everything was created in binary fashion, in dualistic fashion. Everything is comprised of both a mashpia, an element that is the initiator, the provider, and the mikabel, the receiver. Now, generally, but it's not good to overgeneralize ever. But generally speaking, the masculine is associated with the mashbia, with bestowal or filling, while the feminine modality is associated with receiving, with the vessel that welcomes the bounty. And when we understand this, we can better understand why, when the klipot seek to feed parasitically off of the Jewish body, they will approach the male. They are drawn to the source of bestowal. The woman's here, on the other hand, holds no such attraction. So if you were looking to raise funds, you'd go to somebody you know who has funds. You're not going to go to somebody who is themselves having difficulty eking out a living to ask. Okay, if you want lemonade, you have to go to a lemonade stand. You have to go where that thing exists. What changes when a woman gets married? In short, everything. Because at that time, as the Zohar explains, the woman and her husband become plag gufa. They become two halves of one body. Let me repeat that. Two halves of one body. You might be very familiar with the idea that in general, we believe that husband and wife are two halves of one soul. But the Zohar says we actually become two halves of one body. Okay. Now, when the klipot approach this new body comprised of both a male and female aspect, they actually prefer to feed off of the female here. Why? Because again, Kabbalistically, the here, which is about tzimtzum contraction, or alternatively, you could think about it in terms of the Kabbalistic sefirot, with the last one, the 10th one being Malchut, sovereignty. So again, because it's the last of the sefirot, again, it is about intense concentration of Hashem's light. So you could say that a woman's here is like tzimtzum to the second degree. The holy energies delivered through her here are delivered in tiny increments, which make her here very attractive, perfectly conducive for klipot that are seeking to nurture themselves. For example, think about a sippy cup. It's much easier for a child to drink from a sippy cup than to drink from a regular glass. But a sippy cup is not the appropriate vessel for a newborn baby. A newborn baby is going to need a nipple with a tiny hole. But when that same baby is a month old, they're going to need a nipple with a larger hole. So what happens is that the klipot have much greater ease in getting their nourishment and their sukkar from a woman's here. And that is why the woman's hair has to be covered after marriage, does not have to be cut off. It's enough that it is covered, and in that way, it blocks the negative energies from approaching and from causing havoc, God forbid, in her life. So the Zohar says that when a woman covers her hair punctiliously, she blocks the entrance and she impedes the arrival of these klipot. And she not only blockades the klipot, but she actually weakens them. And that becomes the conduit for enormous and magnificent blessings. And I will just note in closing that while the hair that grows from a man's head can bring deleterious and negative effects into his life, in sharp contradistinction, a man's beard that grows downward, the Zohar says, facilitates the downward flow of spiritual bounty, specifically the 13 attributes of God's mercy. So this is a little bit about the subject, and now I'm happy to take questions or your comments.
Thank you, Rivkah. This was fascinating and very, very an eye-opener for many. And if there are any questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can either put it in the chat or you can just raise your hand and you know, we would also appreciate if we have some faces. It's always wonderful to see people's faces. So if there are any questions, now is the time. Thank you. Yes, Lily, always with questions. Let's go. I'll unmute you. Hold on.
I have a few. But one is I didn't get the fact that what changes when a woman gets married. I mean, I didn't get that. So we're two halves of a whole. Why does the klipot like us better all of a sudden? Like what changed? I didn't get that.
Okay. Thank you, Lily, first of all, for giving me the opportunity. These ideas are a little dense. So I welcome the opportunity to repeat. Generally speaking, because the klipot are on a shopping spree, right? They're in search of energies that they need desperately in order to remain alive, okay? But they could find it only in a source of holiness, okay? Now, because the male modality is aligned with giving, with bestowal, with mashpia, the Hebrew word mashpia is rooted in the etymon shefa, which means bounty. Okay, so therefore they're going to go to the men's here under normal circumstances because that modality is about giving. That much we get clear, right? Yes. Okay. Then when people get married, so now the woman becomes the other half of her husband's body. So now the klipa comes shopping, let's just say on a Wednesday morning, and it wants to get its vivifying force. But now, all of a sudden, that it has two kinds of milk to buy, let's say, two kinds of cereal. Now they're both available. It chooses the female. Why? Because it's available in a form that is much more accessible.
Because with the receiver? Because with the receivers usually?
No, because in general, women are aligned with Malchut, and Malchut is the 10th and final level of, let's say, obfuscation on God's energy. So it's already contracted. And then you have the here, and here is about contraction and tzimtzum. So it's tzimtzum to the second degree. And that makes it easier. It's more comfortable. It's in a form that's more convenient. And therefore, the klipot will gravitate towards the woman's hair.
And the more important question I have is why, when I learned, and why when I went to a Orthodox shul, not Chabad, sorry, and why when we even go to Rabbi Raskin's shul, the women come in and get a little doily for the top of their head. They don't get a shmata, they don't get a scarf for the whole head, just for the top. And that's what I've learned is just the crown of the head. I'm not going to say Lashon Hara, but I know a Rebbitzin, again, an Orthodox Rebbitzin from New York, who also goes to shul, puts the doily in the middle, and that's, she's Yoitze, and we're all Yoitze, and that's how I learned many years. And now you're telling me every bit of hair has to be covered. So I want to understand that.
Okay. Thank you, Lily, for a very important question. So Lily, I am not in the same room as you, and I only see you in a small box, but I hear you, and I can hear a woman who is looking for the truth and is intelligent, and therefore I am going to speak. I can only speak my truth to you in the only way that I have it. And Lily, you probably know already that not everything that people do, irrespective of what their titles might be, is a reflection of what should be done. We always hope that people won't, let's just say people won't judge our God by his very feeble children, right? And that people won't judge the Torah by the way those who observe it act. Because we're all filled with foibles and frailties and problems, to make it very easy and succinct. Okay, so on the one hand, it is true that halachically, if a woman covers the crown of her head, then she is observing the minimalistic form of the mitzvah. Okay, according to some, she is observing the mitzvah d'oraita of covering her hair when she leaves her home. Okay, this morning we were discussing the other side of the scale. We were discussing the reason to embrace the stricter way, and not only the stricter way halachically, which would be to cover all of her hair, which, by the way, I just want to make clear, the Talmud says that if a woman doesn't cover all of her hair when she leaves the home, this is called dat Yehudit. This is a reason for which her husband can divorce her without giving her the alimony, the money from the ketubah. In other words, I'm only mentioning this to underscore that covering all of the hair when a woman leaves the house is not any kind of extra. It's not what you call in Hebrew a chumrah. It's not stringency. It is middle of the road halacha, period, exclamation point. That having been said, I would never make fun of the woman who covers her hair with a doily when she comes to shul. I would never mitigate that overture. It is a sign of respect that she recognizes that she's in a holy place and she should do more than she does maybe in other places. Is it the best way? Is it the consummate way? No. But it is a form of keeping this mitzvah to some extent. But we all know that when we care about something deeply, when we have passion for whatever it might be, we go the extra mile. And the same is true. It probably should be the first place it's true in our observance of mitzvot. You know, I've always noticed that if somebody spends $350 on a wheel of cheese, people are like, oh my, such a gourmand. $800 on a bottle of wine, a connoisseur. $4,000 on the last tickets to a ball game, aficionado. A few $1 million on a painting, patron of the arts. But you try to keep the mitzvot that Hashem gave you a little bit too carefully, mishugana. Lost their mind. The implication is that this is somehow not worthy of our passion. So I ask you, if you had a Toyota and somebody wanted to give you what's it called? A Lamborghini. I don't know how to pronounce that Italian most expensive car. Would you say, oh, no, please. I have a Honda. Nah, I don't need it. No, nobody would ever do that. So today we were talking about that. Help me out with the pronunciation here. Lamborghini.
Lamborghini.
In Binghamton, we don't see any Lamborghinis, but in Montreal, you do. So thank you. Yeah. So I hope that helps, Lily.
Thank you. I think that's wonderful. Mazal is raising her hand, so ask it.
Hi, thank you so much. Really, really very profound, everything. I really enjoyed it. I sat in my car to listen. I was taught that the hair is like a tunnel. And the explanation that I always use when trying to impart the importance of covering your hair is just like when you're listening to a radio in the car, and there are, the waves that bring you the connection to the radio. When you go through a tunnel, there's no reception. And so it stops. You can't, your radio goes off, your cell goes off. There's nothing that you can, none of the waves go through. So when I try to explain it to girls, women that don't cover their hair, that's a little bit of the explanation I use. But I find that,
Mazal,
like you said,
Mazal, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but please, if you could just like unpack the metaphor for me. So the here is somehow blocking something, like the tunnel blocks reception. So
exactly. So we're not getting the klipot, right? I'm just trying to see if what I compared to what you're saying, if it makes sense what I teach or not.
I'm not sure I understand.
The head covering services a blocking of the klipot to enter.
Oh, the hair covering, not the hair.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. The hair covering. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. You could use that.
The image of the tunnel and the hair covering is the same.
Got it.
There's no.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was trying.
Yeah.
So, but today we need more chizuk for women that don't understand so much the importance of covering their hair. So everything we've learned now is beautiful, but it's so profound. I think women need, like, tachlis, just like you said, it's just a mitzvah, and that's what you have to do. There's no rationale really that makes you understand it.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing is not to make up stories. That's the most important thing. And there's just way too much of this nonsense. And like I said, especially surrounding women's mitzvot, it's like, enough. Just say the truth. It's a mitzvah. You want to have a deeper explanation? Here's a Kabbalistic explanation. If that's not your cup of tea, no problem.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much.
I see Nancy's raising her hand. You want to unmute?
Yes. Hi.
Hey, Nancy.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. Hi. So
we're getting your signal in the tunnel.
Okay. So for those of us that already cover our hair, there are times where it has to be uncovered. For example, when we switch from a head covering like this to our wig, or when we take a shower. So how does the Kabbalistic explanation fit? Like, doesn't the klipot come to us when we do that?
Very simply, for those of us who are very attentive to this teaching, you try to expose your hair as little as possible. That's all.
But in the shower.
So in the shower,
your whole body is exposed.
Yeah, I don't think we need to like obsess over this. If a woman wants to be very, very careful, then, she can put the wig in such a way where she takes off the scarf and she puts the wig in the same movement. But, halavai, that should be our biggest problem.
Okay, there is another question that came up. Okay, I see Liron is raising her hand, but in the meantime, women that are divorced, do they have the same obligation to cover their hair? You mentioned that when one loses their virginity, that's when this mitzvah becomes, part of a woman's, a woman before marriage does not have an obligation to cover her hair, but a woman after marriage does. So does that also include women that are either widowed or divorced?
That is a matter of women should take up with her rabbinic authority in her community. There are certainly communities in which women who are divorced continue to keep their hair covered. And there are other communities where that's not the case. And that's something that she should take up with her rabbinic authority in her community.
Thank you. Liron, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for an amazing class. I don't have a question, but I just want to
show your face, Liron, or you are not able?
No, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay.
I look terrible. I just wanted to share that I'm married now for 5 years. I only started covering my hair a year ago. And I just want to say that it's the best thing I ever did. And it's just so amazing. And I feel like a bat melech when I walk in the street. I feel like a queen. And anyone who's struggling or wondering if they need to call me. I'm going to talk to them. And I don't know how to explain. I'm even thankful because, like, I didn't grow up being expected to cover my hair. I grew up in a traditional Shomer Shabbat Moroccan family, Tahat Mishpacha, Shabbat, not covering a hair. So I didn't grow up as a given. It was something that I chose and took upon myself. And it's just the best thing I ever did. That's all.
And it should bring you lots of mazal and bracha in your personal life. And we wish you and Yohan Bezrat Hashem to be blessed with Zara, Chaya, V'Kayama. And we can all answer Amen.
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 And just the way I'm crying now is nothing to compare to the way that Mrs. Raskin was crying when I told her. And to the way, shout out to my best friend in New York, my Mashpia Avivit, who was almost unconscious when I told her that I was going to cover my hair. So
I'm still recovering.
Thank you. And this class was so on point. You're so specific. 1, 2 + 3 = amazing. Thank you. Amazing.
Beautiful. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Rivkah, my dear sister, for agreeing to do this. And we appreciate your time, your wisdom, and every word is so precious. Thank you so much.
Always a privilege to do anything for you and to be in the presence of your wonderful community and friends.